Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at theming with Material UI. This will include some of the basic things that you can do and also some of the more complex things that may not be as straightforward for you from the get-go. If you're here to just grab some code, then there's a link down in the description below to the GitHub repository. So go ahead and click that if you just want to grab the code. Since you're on your way there, then click the like button on your way down anyway, and we'll get started with the video in the meantime. So just a quick little intro to what Material UI is if you don't know. It's a component library for React. You can install it in your app by running some simple commands like the npm install, and it's also pretty straightforward to set up on your app. All you need in your app to get started with Material UI is to install it and then add in the theme provider and a CSS baseline wrapper around your app. And then you can start importing these components right into your application and get some pretty cool pre-built components out of the box. So for example here, what we're going to be working with today are a few different typography components and some buttons and also some fabs. So as you can see here, what's being rendered from the code on the left is we have some typographies which are rendering hello multiple times. And then we have 4 different buttons, and I'll just talk about like why they look different and what's going on here, and also these fabs here. So in regards to theming with Material UI, there's a few common ways of doing it, and those are definitely going to be the ones that you're going to be using most often. This video is going to be focusing more on the theme.tsx file and how you can customize this, because I don't feel like the resources out there is very clear on how to use this properly and how to set the global styles in your application. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. However, I do just want to touch on these other ways of doing it, which includes the styled components. The first one we're going to look at now is a styled button. So as you can see here, I'm importing styled from the MUI system, and I've wrapped the button from it, and this button is being imported from Material. So the Material UI button component is being wrapped in this style, and then followed by a function which is returning a style for that button. So in here, you would just use the JSX syntax for declaring CSS. For example, here I've got a background color. I could also add a height, for example, or any type of CSS property I can think of using JSX syntax. So CSS would be like this and with color like that. But when we're using the JSX syntax, it's like this instead. So I could set a height of, let's say 20, for example. There you can see that button's changed to 20. And that's because now I'm rendering this button using style button. I'm no longer using just a regular button as I'm doing with these ones. I'm just going to undo that. That's what the styled components do, and honestly I really like this approach. I would personally use this quite a bit in my own applications, so I might have a separate folder for common components I'll use for my application, and I will design them in such a way and then just use those components for my application, which will basically have a base using the Material UI, getting me started pretty quickly, but then I can also modify them and have different versions of them also if I want to across different sections of my website or application. So looking at some of the basic properties that you have on these components, I would say the most common one is variant. So most components usually come with a variant, and the way you know what variants they have is I would suggest to make their website your best friend. So when you go into the Material UI website, you can look at the things you want. So for example, if I look at button, it will show me here that look, there are basic buttons. These are the 3 different types of buttons. There are variant text, contained, and outline. So you can see text only gets a background when I hover over it. It's contained and outline. I choose the one I want, and I will pass that into my property here. Also, I can set the color to primary, which will be the primary color I've set in my theme file, and color secondary, that is also something I can set in the theme file as well. So the other way to theme your properties is using the SX property. This is essentially the same as doing style on a component in React, but SX is just shorthand for it. and it's basically just allowing you to do inline CSS on your components. So you might have already declared a styled component, which maybe there's only one specific case where you've changed a single property on it, and it's maybe not worth it to create a whole new other component that's copying that component just to have a single property on it. So then you can just extend it and do something like this on there. Just to also mention some of the other stuff that we have in this page right now. We have a container, which basically just puts our components inside a centered div on the page, and stack allows us to basically just, as the name suggests, stack our components, and then we can pass in a spacing property which will add in some padding in between the components. It's quite nice to use when you just want to add things in and just stack them on top of each other with little effort. You can also change the direction, as I've done here with these ones where I've got another stack which has a direction of row. So I think this type of styling is pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. You can style these, you can add in whatever properties or CSS properties you want, create these style components, reuse these style components throughout your application, add in inline CSS. There used to be a way for you to pass in class names to these components as well. I think, yeah, you still can, but the Material UI documentation doesn't even talk about that anymore, so I assume that they've just went in a different direction about it altogether, as like this isn't even being encouraged to be used anymore, so I won't even go into it any further. You can also have classic CSS files and have your CSS names in there as well, which I don't really like to do with React, as I usually much prefer to go for the styled components approach myself. However, today we're going to be looking at the theme.tsx file and looking at how we can change our styles globally in our application, and how we can target specific components, overwrite specific things, and just set things that will make our lives a little bit easier, and modify the default Material UI theme to our liking, so that maybe we don't have to do as much custom theming throughout the rest of the application as we're building it. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just like the setup of this file. It's you import create theme from Material UI, and you create the theme with an object and you export it, and then this can just be ported into your index.tsx file, which is passed into your theme provider, and then that's your theme for your application. The most basic thing you can do in here is set up your palette, and I would suggest that everybody do set up their palette to set the main color theme for your application. So probably the most important one would be your primary color, as everything defaults to your primary color. For example, in here, if I don't have this color set to primary on this contain primary button, you can see it still takes a primary color. So if I don't want to pass that in on every single button, my primary color would be the color for me to change. So to set the primary color, what we want to do is add in the palette option, and then underneath primary, we want to set the main color to a specific color. And I'm just going to import blue from Material UI. And I can set this to different shades of blue by using this brackets here, but I'll just go for 500 as the median. And you can see here that that color has been changed to like a slightly lighter blue, or let's go for something a bit more darker. You can see that's gone into a dark blue. I think I like the 500, so I'll stick to 500 for now. And then we can also change the secondary color, and the way I'll do that is by setting secondary and main for secondary as well. So main is basically referring to what is chosen when you just type in secondary into the color field here. And so I'll just set this to a red. Let's do red 500. And I'll import that red from Material UI again. And then you can see my button has changed to a red button. So that's kind of like the main bit that you need to understand about setting your primary and secondary color in your file. The other important ones will be things such as success, or error, or warning, or info. And these are the different types of components that you get in Material UI for specific statuses. So for example, if we take a look at alerts, you can show these little banners in your application with Material UI, and when you select the severity, you can say error, warning, info, success, and these will be like the default colors for those. But you can also apply these colors directly to your buttons and different components as well. So instead of secondary, I could say error. So this could be an error colored button, and that's a different kind of red. So if I change this to success, for example, this could be a success button, and I could change the color of the success button in here as well. So if I did success main, let's do green, let's do purple. Then as you can see, my success button has turned into a purple. The other things to note is when you're working with light and dark mode, at the moment haven't got that set up, but you can also change what the light and dark mode for your colors will be. So if, for example, on light mode, I wanted my blue to be slightly darker, I could change it to this. And then on my dark mode, I could change it to something slightly lighter, for example, by setting the dark version of my primary color to something else. I'm not going to delve too much into light and dark mode because I think that could be a separate video on its own to show how to use light mode and dark mode and set it up properly on your application. So if you'd be interested in that, then please leave a comment and let me know you want to see something like that, and I can look into making a video for it. Moving on, one very quick but amazing thing about Material UI, which I use all the time, I wanted to just point out to you guys, is the responsive font sizes. So that's the reason I've put these hellos here, is to show you guys what you can do by just doing responsive font sizes into your application. Import that from Material UI. And what you basically get is when you use these typography components for your text, which you should be using throughout your entire application, if you need to change the size of these variants, I'm going to be showing you how you can do that in a second. But what you get with the responsive font sizes is that when you go into a smaller view size, you can see the size of the text changes. I'll show you again. The size changes so that it fits the view width better and makes it easier for the users to read if they're on a smaller device, for example. So that's basically just like a free way to manage your font sizes in Material UI. So there's no reason you shouldn't have this by default in your theme file. Okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and take a look at this button and see how I can customize this button. So I've got this button here. This is my primary button, and I want to change all of my buttons across my application to not be this square type button. I want it all to have more of a border radius. So how will I do this? In the theme file, I want to extend the components property, and inside here I will be selecting the MUI button, and underneath this I would select style overrides. And then within style overrides, if you hit Control Spacebar, you can see all the different things that you can overwrite. If I wanted to just overwrite everything, I would select the root, and the root will be the root style for this Material UI button. And then I could say on root that I want all border radius on all buttons to be 20, for example. Now you can see all of my buttons across my whole entire website, no matter what variant they are, they've all changed their border radius to 20. So let's say, for example, I didn't want to apply this to all the different buttons. I specifically only wanted to do it to the outline buttons. The way I would do this is, instead of selecting root as a style override, I would select that specific selector. So as I said before, you can hit Control Spacebar to see all the different things that you can overwrite. And in here, we know that we use the outline button, and it's an outlined primary button. So what I'm going to look for in here is the outlined primary button. And if I save that, then that will only affect this button selector across the website. Cool. So in case for whatever reason your IntelliSense isn't working, or you don't use Visual Studio Code and you don't have that luxury, there is a way to see all the different styles that's applied to this button. So if you go onto the Material website and you select the component that you're editing and you scroll all the way down, you will see this API section, and you can click on the specific component that you're using. the button, and on here you get some useful information about all the properties that it takes. So this is useful to know that the different types of things that you can do. So for example, the disable ripple is something I had on my code on this button. As you can see, when you click a button, it does this little ripple effect. I have the disable ripple effect on this contained outline button here, and when I click it, you can see nothing happens. It doesn't do the ripple effect, in case you wanted to remove that. And yeah, so if you want to refer back to the API for this and see all the possible parameters you can pass into the components, you can look here. But what we want to talk about is the styling. And if you scroll down, you can see the CSS, and it will tell you these are all the different CSS properties that you can overwrite and that Material UI will use to style your components. So there is another way you could also overwrite these, but I wouldn't recommend, is having these global classes inside your project. So you define a specific CSS class with this name to overwrite that CSS that's coming from Material UI. But I'd much rather prefer to go through the theme.tsx file to do this instead, as we have all the tools we need to do that there. So you can see here, the outline primary is one of the options that I use. You have a list of every single thing that you can do here. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the fabs. I'm just going to close these as we don't really need them anymore. Here I've got 3 fabs. They've got an icon in the middle. They've all got the color primary, and they've got the size large, medium, and small. And as you can see, that's the properties that size takes: large, medium, and small. So let's say I wanted to change the size of the large one, and I go over to do the same thing here. So I select MUI fab, and I try to overwrite it. So I'm going to do style overrides. And then I'm going to look for something that sounds like, I suppose, text large or size large. So I search for size, and wait, hold on a second. There isn't a size large. There's only a size medium and a size small. So I'll go ahead and go into the component API for the fabs, and I'll just have a look at their list here of CSS rules. Okay, so I can see they've got a size small and a size medium, but they don't have a size large. However, they do let me have a size large. So here, the size large is actually the default. So if you don't provide a size, it will just default to size large. However, it's not providing me the option to overwrite this because they're not exposing any specific classes for the large. The large properties just fall under the root component. So what I need to do is target the root component, but not apply it to all roots, because if I just did root and then changed the, let's say I wanted to change the width and height of this, let's say I wanted to 60, that would change everything. So what I need to do is specifically say, when the size is large, I want it to be this width and height. So the way I would do that is I would change root into a function. So the function will take in a property called owner state, and then I will spread owner state in this return function, and I'll do owner state dot size equals large. So only when owner state dot size is large, and the owner state is the state of the component that's in your application. And when that's the case, I want to return width 60 and height 60. And as you can see now, this has changed only the height and size of this. Just to make it even more obvious, I'll make this 100. So now my large button is actually truly large, and I've set that by overwriting the state for when size is large. So you can do this for any of the other ones as well. So if, for example, outline primary had a specific state or specific property that you wanted to change on, you could hand pick and select those, even if there aren't CSS classes exposed for them. As I said before, the size was defaulted to large. So let's say I didn't want to just pass in the size every time throughout the whole entire application. but I didn't want it to default to large. I wanted it to default to medium, for example, instead. But I didn't want to get rid of large. I still wanted large to be there as an option. What I could also do here is, instead of style overrides, I can pass in default props. So the default prop will allow me to override any default props that is set on the component. So if I set this to medium, then if I don't pass in a size property to the component, then it will default it to medium. And as you can see now, that has changed the button to the medium size to match when size is actually equal to medium as well. Cool. So we also looked at variants and the different types of variants that we can have. So let's have a look at this, for example, and see what variants we have on this fab. If I just hover over this, you can see that I've got a circular and an extended. So if I change this to extended, because circular is already the default, you can see this changes the shape of it a little bit. I can add other things in here and then it will turn into some text like that. Whereas if I add a text in here, I don't think it's as nice as you can see here. So if I have this variant where it's extended, then I get a nicer kind of alignment inside the fab. So what if I wanted to add my own variant? So this is also something that we can do within this file, and we can make this available to us across our entire application. And the way we do this is declaring the variance property still inside this MUI fab. And this is an array, and you can define as many different variants as you want. And within the array, you have an object which will say props, and the props will take in a variant. So will be variant, and then you can give the name of the variant. So I'm just going to make a variant for the fab to be square. And then after this, I can pass in the style, and the style would be border radius 10, I guess, or something. Cool. So actually, this would work if it was just vanilla JavaScript, but since we're using TypeScript here, I also need to extend the Material UI types to support this. So the way we can do this is by creating a new file, and we'll just call this file MUI-extended. .d.ts. And inside here, we'll import the Material UI module, as we want to extend this, not overwrite it. And then we will declare the new module material. And inside here, extend the interface for fab props variant overrides. This will vary on the component that you're overriding, and then in here I will just add in square true, and this will add in the square property as part of the theme for variant overrides. And as you can see now, this is not erroring anymore, and it allows me to define this props as a square. And that means also now when I go into the code, I can also find on here, square is now an option that I can select as a variant. And if I save that, you can see I now have a square fab instead. And I can obviously extend this to do whatever I wanted to do. And that is pretty much all I wanted to cover today. I didn't want to use this video to go into details about all the different types of styling that you can do, like different CSS values that you can apply to things, because those things you can look up, those things you can try out for yourself and style your components however you need to. I think these are the techniques that I thought would be important, things that are not quite intuitive to understand, but also gives you great flexibility over managing your styling across your entire application. This allows you to have very good control of the default Material UI theme that you get. Personally, I'm still a fan of using styled components and building out styled components to use across my application. And I wouldn't use this theme file to go into this much granularity to just define specific components. but it's good to know and understand how it works, so that if there is anything that you want to add to give yourself that extra flexibility around your application, you can do it. There are multiple ways of digging into it, and at first, Material UI can seem as if it's a bit locked away. There are certain things that when you try to override in your styled components, it just doesn't really work the way you think it would, or you try to add in the inline style and that it doesn't really take effect and stuff like that. But if you overwrite it from the root of their actual styles in Material UI, then it should always overwrite and you'd be able to get the desired effect that you're after. So one thing I didn't touch on in this video is breakpoints, which I think is very important when it comes to developing, especially for mobile friendly applications. However, I think that's a separate topic. If you'd like to see a video on breakpoints and how you can use Material UI to create responsive applications, then please let me know. I'd be happy to take a look at making a video for that, and just leave me some feedback and tell me how I'm doing. If you're enjoying these videos, if there's anything I could do better, I'd really appreciate your feedback. That's all for today. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Subscribe for more content. Peace out.